So welcome everyone, and this is our second month of the first Thursday gathering for Luminous Mind Sangha. And it was so lovely last month just to see all of you here, just as it is right now. I just love looking around and seeing faces of people that I recognize and know, and it's really brings a lot of joy to me. So welcome, and we're really glad you're here. And tonight I'll be talking about working with personality material. A few announcements before we get into the meditation. We'll do a meditation, and then we'll have a little break, and then I'll get into the Dharma talk, and then there'll be time for questions for the last 15 minutes or so, something like that. And we do record this for our YouTube channel. So if you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, we're actually getting a pretty large collection of videos on there, and people are taking advantage of that. Okay, so we will now do a sitting for about 25 minutes, something like that. And so I'll do a little bit of guiding that's related to our topic tonight to start with. So go ahead and find a good posture for tonight, being upright and relaxed. And you can do whatever practice you like. Could be samatha, working with the breath and the area between the upper lip and the nostril, or it could be vipassana, where you might start with the breath at the belly and then open that up. Or maybe you're doing heart practices, extending loving kindness or one of the other Brahma Viharas to yourself or others. So whatever practice you're doing, as you are with your object of meditation, and you find that your mind goes off, or you notice something other than your object, just the encouragement is to just notice if there are patterns with that. And most of you have heard me talk about working with your patterns, but since we'll be talking about that tonight, just to notice what patterns are coming up, how that is a pattern that may be familiar to you. And you can either come back to your object of meditation and challenge that pattern, or you could investigate the pattern a little bit to learn more about it. But these patterns are the building blocks of the ego self. They're the grooves in our consciousness, so it's good to know what they are. And then we can work with them skillfully. So I'll stop with the instructions there, and we'll go into our silent sitting now. So tonight I'll be talking about working with personality material, and this is probably the thing that I get asked the most about, that people don't really say it like that. It's more like, I keep going off of the object. What do I do about that? You know, and so in Buddhism, traditionally, we have the hindrances and the defilements, which are very negative sounding words for the personality patterns, which is what I like to call it. It's a lot more neutral, but basically they're patterns that the Buddha identified that, you know, pretty much anything that takes us off of our object can be put into these categories. And I'll just go through them. I know you may know them, but just as a refresher. So the hindrances are considered a little bit more, you know, circumstantial or at the surface, and the defilements are considered to be more kind of like core patterns, but there is an overlap between them. So the first three hindrances pretty much sort of equate to the defilements. So the five are desire, aversion, delusion, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. So desire is when we're finding that things are taking us off of our object, that are things that we want, things that are like things that we desire. You know, we're thinking about something that is drawing our attention because we want it. And it can be sense desire, but it can also be the desire for experiences or, you know, a partner, the right job, things like that, that we can be kind of, you know, thinking about that will pull us off of our object. And then really the hindrances and defilements are seen as what cause us to suffer as well, because there's a way where with desire, even if we get the thing we want, we may be satisfied for some period of time, but within a short amount of time, we'll forget that now we have the thing, and then we'll want something else. So, you know, basically it's the ego self is just a desiring machine. And even if it gets the thing, that machine is still going. So that's desire. Aversion is things we don't want. So this is when we find we're going off because we want to kind of get rid of something. And if I could just get rid of that problematic thing, then I would be okay. So this includes hatred, anger, and fear. And each of those is different. I mean, they feel different. Hatred's more of like a cold, like just, I want to just annihilate that thing, like, you know, just freeze it out. Anger is more like, I want to punch that thing. You know, it's more of a going towards sort of hot energy. And then fear is, you know, it's a more of a contraction, that I want to get away from that bad thing. And so those are in the aversion category. And then we have, as a defilement, delusion, which is a kind of falling asleep on ourselves. So the hindrance equivalent to that is sloth and torpor, which is actual sleepiness. So a lot of times when we're meditating, if we're sleep deprived, we are going to be biologically sleepy, but most of the people who have this as a defilement, they aren't, it's not like a biological thing. We're falling asleep on ourselves. And so how do we fall asleep on ourselves in life? How do we not want to know something that we really know, but we don't really want to know it? So like, I'm just not going to have that conversation. I'll just pretend that it's not there. Or, you know, something in our life that might be painful or that we wish wasn't true, and we'll just kind of fall asleep on ourselves to it. It's also delusion, when delusion equates to neutral. So when things are too neutral, we have to make it more exciting. And nowadays, the aversion to neutral is so prevalent because people are just conditioned to it with their cell phones, where we can't. In the old days, we used to stand in line at a store and just be with, you know, maybe talk to our neighbor, just stand there silently. Well, now if you look in a line anywhere, everybody in line is looking at their phone. And they're scrolling through text they've looked at, you know, 400 times just to have something to do. So it's, this has gotten a lot worse just in the last 10 or 20 years, where we can't be with neutral. So, and then we have restlessness and remorse, which is often a fidgetiness in the body, or we're ruminating about something we did that was unskillful. And then doubt is one that a lot of times people don't really realize is actually a hindrance. They just believe it. It's an easy one to believe and not see as an actual hindrance. So a lot of times people also have doubt about their practice. That's one I see on retreat a lot. But even in life, you know, is this meditation doing any good? Am I any happier? So people get into loops of doubt about their practice or about themselves or their life, about the teachings. So this is a way to categorize our patterns. But ultimately, the most useful thing, in my opinion, is to see your own patterns that are unique to you, and to Like I encourage people to, find their top 10 hits, or even just your top 2 or 3 hits, like, the parade of songs that are just playing, and to have a name for it that's unique to you, that summarizes it. Like, somebody could say aversion. Well, there's a big difference between fear aversion and anger aversion, so just saying aversion doesn't really like give you the feel of what it is for you, because really what you're seeing in this is the building blocks of your ego self. That's what you're seeing. So it's really useful to become familiar with it, and then we can work it both on and off the cushion. So I'll get into some examples in a bit. So, working with the psychological material, I've really seen that there's 2 types that come up the most for people. There's conditioned habits. So sometimes these are just habits that we've gone over in our consciousness so much that there are grooves. They are grooves in our consciousness. And we now know through the neuroscience that they are actually, they're not so much grooves, but they're synaptic pathways, that a synaptic pathway in the mind, a thought that we've had over and over, will be thicker than one that we haven't gone over. It's actually in your brain thicker because it's gotten used more. And Rick Hansen, I like this phrase, let's see, what fires together wires together. So, you think about that. Every time you have that thought, you're creating a stronger wiring basically in your brain. Or every time you turn away from it, you're weakening that. And so these are the grooves in our consciousness. We have 80 to 90,000 thoughts a day. So think of that. How many times, if you have a pattern, how many millions, trillions of times in your lifetime? The contents may change, but the pattern itself, if somebody's an aversion type and wherever they go, something bugs them, like I had a student who did a bunch of my 2-week retreats, and, every time he would sit in the hall, somebody would be breathing too loud, or their pants would be swishing when they walked, or whatever, somebody mumbled to themselves, and then finally he said, like the 3rd retreat, he said, I wonder if it's me, this keeps happening, and that was the big breakthrough. And he started to get some freedom from it because he could see it work in his personal life. It was everywhere. And it's a defense mechanism. All of these are defenses that we developed so that we didn't have to be with something that was overwhelming. As a child, we developed these so that we could be okay in our environment. So these can then turn into just, they're conditioned and they're habitual. And then the other type that I've seen is undigested material. So things that we haven't been with it, and it's like calling to us for healing. So when I first started teaching, I could see that there's a way, unfortunately, in Buddhism, you sort of like want to kill the ego and you want to just get rid of the defilements and the hindrances. Really, when you look at it, these things have protected us in some way. So we don't have to hate them. Really, what they're doing is they're calling for us to attend to them in a way that they can actually be digested and healed. So it's like, imagine your 5-year-old self who had to be, like, say somebody has rehearsing as a pattern. Well, maybe you had a critical parent, and if you said it just right, you weren't going to get criticized. So you would rehearse it in your mind over and over to minimize the possibility of that. And that was actually a really effective thing to do as a 5-year-old. But like, why are you doing it now while you're sitting on a meditation cushion? It's running on autopilot. But at the time when we're 5 years old, we have a critical parent, it's overwhelming and we can't deal with it. And so we develop this defense so we don't have to feel how painful that actually is, to just be with the fact that somebody is coming at us with that negative energy. So this is where part of the opportunities is to actually digest these places that have that were too painful at the time, but we have the resources now that we can sit with it and open it up and actually digest it to where that structure in our consciousness can get reabsorbed into our deeper nature so that it's not a structure anymore. And it doesn't call for our attention. So it's calling for our attention so that it can get healed. It's not just there as an annoyance. So if we think of it that way, then our patterns end up, there's a lot of purposefulness there. And we don't have to, ultimately everything's coming from the ground of being, even our patterns. So if we can approach it in more of an inclusive way, that way nothing has to be left out. It's a much healthier way to approach our patterns, even though they are kind of annoying that they're taking us off of our breath and we wish that they weren't there. So there's different ways of working with these, and I'll talk about each of the meditation categories. So last month I talked about the 4 categories that are being studied mostly in neuroscience, and then how this corresponds with the 4 practices that we teach at Luminous Mind Sangha. And in Buddhism, these are the main categories of heart-based, focused attention, open monitoring, and self-transcending. And each category practice helps us work with our patterns in a different way, and they each bring something really valuable and useful to help digest and decondition the compulsiveness of these patterns. So, when I say compulsive, it's not a word that's judgmental. It's really just descriptive that if we're trying to meditate, say with the breath, and we're going off all the time, or even if we're going off just a little into a pattern, it's compulsive. We can't not do it. So how do we reduce? Part of what happens is within these patterns is they become less compulsive, and they don't pull us as much. They aren't so magnetic. And there are times when we can feel like it's just about to get our attention, but then it peters out, and that starts happening more and more as the patterns thin out to where it's actually possible. And I know that, some of you, many of you have probably seen this, where a pattern just stops arising completely. Like something that may have really gripped you 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it just doesn't really bother you that much, or it doesn't grab you in the same way, or it's dramatically less. So that's really the potential, is that these things, the same stimulus in our environment can come up, but it just like, if we think about it as a button that gets pushed saying, activate that pattern, the stimulus can come, but there's no button there anymore. It may not be our favorite thing to have happen, but it doesn't actually trigger a reactive response anymore. So that's really the potential. And we're going to suffer so much less when that's the case. So, really exploring these things deeply is part of what allows us to digest them, and challenging the compulsiveness of going there, just not going there is part of what deconditions the habit of it. And ultimately, after we're on the path for a while or have worked with the pattern for a while, and after awakening, we can see these, especially the thought patterns, they're really any phenomena. We can see and experience them as empty. In Buddhism, traditionally, one of the ways that teachers would deal with people asking about this would be to say, oh, it's all empty, just ignore it. Well, now that we have psychology, we know that that's actually called spiritual bypassing. So, these don't go away because you ignore them. They basically just get pushed into the subconscious. That's what happens. And then they leak out all over the place in really unhealthy ways, which is a big explanation for why we have scandals in Buddhism. The teacher was sitting there thinking, I really want to have sex with that student, 42 million times, and just went, it's all empty, it's all empty. And then one day they act on it. And now there's all this harm that's been done. So it doesn't work. Just saying it's empty It's true though. So there is a truth there. It is actually empty. But if that isn't our experience of it directly, that just becomes a way of bypassing. So I really encourage people not to use that. And, you know, all the lineages of Buddhism that I know of do use that. But, you know, this was all created before psychology, before we knew that it just doesn't work, even though there is a truth in it that we can see when we're really in touch with our deeper nature in profound ways. It's true, but it's just not helpful. It's not helpful for actually digesting those patterns. So the first thing then would be to notice like the top 2 or 3 that you have, even though the contents of it, the situations might change. That pattern is something you see over and over, and to start noticing it off of the cushion. So this is really where, you know, if all we're doing in our practice is using our 30 minutes on the cushion or hour, or however long it is that we sit every day, and then we got 15 hours a day where we're totally disconnected, we're missing a huge opportunity to see how this is actually operating in our life, how we're doing the same exact thing, because really you're seeing the grooves in your consciousness. Those grooves are there whether you're meditating, whether you're at work or with your partner or with your kids or dealing with your finances or a health issue. You know, those same defense mechanisms are in place no matter what you're doing. So to start seeing how these are showing up in life, you know, if somebody, say, is very anxious, how is that anxiety really causing a lot of suffering in life? And what's it doing? And this is where, when I get into the 4 categories, Vipassana, in my opinion, is one that ultimately you will have to use for any pattern to really understand it. So to be curious, like, what is really going on with this pattern? What is it doing for me? If you take the judgment off, so that would be part of it, is to not let your superego that's saying you shouldn't have the pattern or you should be over it. You've been practicing for X number of years. Why am I not over this yet? You know, just see if you can let go of all that, because it's not helpful. It's just keeping you from actually understanding and opening up the pattern. So see if you can take the judgment off and then just get curious, like, what is this actually doing for me? So like, say for somebody who's anxious, well, anxiety is basically curiosity on on steroids. It's like a hyper vigilant curiosity. So our natural curiosity to understand what's going on around us, with anxiety, it's like, okay, where's the next disaster going to happen? You know, it's like an over heightened curiosity that is really like, okay, if I just see everything, I can prevent all the bad stuff. That's sort of what it's trying to do. And instead of just being with the First Noble Truth, ultimately, if we can be with the First Noble Truth, it helps us to be with whatever the pattern is, which is, you know, the First Noble Truth that we're all going to have things that we don't like that happen. It's impossible to avoid it. The Buddha couldn't avoid it. I mean, he had back pain. His cousin tried to kill him. And there was infighting in the Sangha. He couldn't control his group to keep them from fighting with each other. So, you know, if the Buddha wasn't exempt from this kind of stuff that was problematic in his life, none of us are going to be exempt either. So if we can accept that we can't actually control everything that happens, there's a way that we can sort of then be curious, okay, if I accept that no matter how hypervigilant I am, say if for an anxious person, there's bad stuff's going to happen. Even no matter what I do, things that I don't want are going to happen. It can help us to see that the pattern really, if we can accept underneath that there's a truth of the human experience that bad things will happen, it can sort of start to let us see, well, can I be with the fact that I don't like that bad things are going to happen, and that I'm trying to not actually believe that the First Noble Truth is true, that somehow I can be exempt? And there can be some getting closer to that uncontrollability. So a lot of times underneath the defense mechanism, in this case, we're talking about the defense mechanism of anxiety, is a fear of actually like being in touch with the uncontrollability of life, that I'm powerless. And to feel like, say that we have a loved one or a family member who votes for someone different than we think they should. And so every time we're going to a gathering where that person's going to be there, we're plotting of how we're going to talk to them about how ill-informed and wrong they are and this and that. We're obsessing about how, they're ruining the country and this and that. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying, can we actually change their mind? And so sometimes it's just a matter of saying, you know what? I'm never going to change their mind, and I hate that. And I'm sitting here spending hours thinking about it on the meditation cushion, and instead of accepting my powerlessness and actually being with the fact that I hate how powerless I am. And so hatred, for example, is a distortion of power. And so a lot of times when we find ourselves in a hatred response, we're feeling the hatred because actually we feel powerless to stop that person. And it's so painful to be with the powerlessness. But in our practice, if we actually can let ourselves go there, there is a way we can get closer to whatever is underneath the spinning in the mind that's trying to keep us from not actually being in touch with that thing that's really hard to be with. Because as a kid, we couldn't be with these things. Like, say that we had a parent who was, all of us as kids had parents who made us do things we didn't want to. And as 3-year-olds, we said to them, I hate you, I hate you. And that was immediately when they said, don't ever say that again. Go sit in your room for an hour quietly, stuff like that. It's just so not acceptable in society. And yet we did feel the hatred because we were powerless. So, now is the chance to reclaim these parts of us that just got pushed under the surface, and that now we're spending all this time on the cushion being pulled off thinking about these things instead of just being with the truth as it really is. So that's the potential, is to see the pattern, to get curious, what's it doing for me? How is this giving me something, even though it's something that isn't really my deeper nature? It's doing something. Like if I feel hatred, I can reclaim my power because I can hate them silently and they'll never know. And even if they don't change, I can still hate them. And I feel a little bit of power there in hating them. But it's a false power. So, if we can take the judgment of the superego off and just be curious about what is going on here with this, whatever the pattern is, what's it doing for me? How is it somehow giving me something that's feels good on the surface, but if we really feel under it, we can feel that it is actually a defilement, that it has a scratchy kind of unwholesome energy to it. And that's where we can start really teasing it apart and seeing that it's covering something that we don't want to actually be in touch with. That's true. That's a truth. So like I worked with somebody today who's, kind of at the ending stages of life, very committed to awakening, and really is realizing, I may only have a limited number of years left. And, the way most people in the US at least handle it, you just pretend you're going to live forever. You don't talk about death, don't look at it, because it's a loss. There's a genuine truth of loss in the fact that there is going to be an end to life for all of us, but that's hard to be with. But if we can actually be with the loss and the sense and go through it, there can become an equanimity with something like that. So, this is another place where if we're actually with the truth of reality, at some point there can be equanimity with the truth that I can't get my family member to vote differently, or that I can't control whether a bad thing is going to happen to me. I can do a lot, but sitting here being on hyperdrive anxiously isn't actually helping to prevent that 100% of the time. It's just not possible. So, we want to have an open curiosity about what's going on, why it's there. And then each of the practices, so that's really Vipassana. So I'll start with that no matter, even if we're doing another practice, like say we're doing samatha and something's taking us off of the breath, at some point we'll need to use Vipassana to investigate that pattern. So, or we can just use inquiry off the cushion, but we want to actually feel, what does it feel like to be in, say, some people have fantasizing. It's more of a desire-based pattern, fantasizing about their next trip, about fun things they're going to do, about, having a spiritual attainment, about, who knows what the fantasy could be about. But some people have desire-based patterns that take them off, and to feel it and really feel, okay, what does it feel like when I'm fantasizing? And it's really, I'm enjoying it. It feels really good. But then if we're with that long enough, we can feel that it's like empty. It's not real. It's just an idea. It's just in the mind. And we can feel that it's not actually, we're not in the present moment. All of these things take us away from the present moment. And that's where they start feeling defiled. They're delusional. And so really feeling into that with the Vipassana, what does it feel like? What's it doing for me? How is it protective in some way? How has this protected me? A lot of times for kids who go into fantasy, maybe they liked reading a lot of novels because that was way better than hearing their parents fighting out in the kitchen. It was a lot better to be off on some island having a wilderness adventure than to hear your parents fighting in the kitchen. So, if we're really compassionate towards ourselves, whatever our patterns are, we can see that they're trying to be protective, but they're actually taking us out of the present moment. And that's not really helpful in the long run. So that's Vipassana. And ultimately, if we really want to digest the patterns, we're going to have to really open them up in this way. And so I'll go through the other three categories. So the heart practices, a lot of times when we start really feeling into what these patterns have done for us and why they're there, there's usually some pain underneath that, of why we needed that pattern and what it did for us, childhood, circumstances of how that was needed in our environment. And also we can be in touch with how we've suffered as a result of that pattern in our life. And so this is really a great time to bring in the heart practices, is to have some compassion for ourselves, for how hard it was and why we have used this pattern and how it's been protective. Even though it's not an ultimate truth, there's a way where it has comforted us in some way. And so to bring in loving kindness or compassion for ourselves, or even equanimity, like if we're seeing something in the world that we're trying to improve, but maybe we can't, to use the equanimity practice to see, is it possible for me? I'm going to keep trying to make the world better, but can I do it not from a reactive place, but from a sense of knowing that I can't know the bigger picture of the unfoldment of the universe? You know, I mean, sometimes things have to get worse in order for there to be an uprising for things to get better. And that may even be after our lifetime. So we can't always know why things are happening the way they are, but can we have equanimity? So this is where the heart, the four Brahma Viharas can really come in and be helpful. The samatha practice comes in because the samatha is helping us break the compulsiveness and really develop the strength to turn away from the ruminating, to realize that we are ruminating and that we're hurting ourselves, and to come back. And so samatha is really helping us with hindrances and defilements by really committing to not wallowing in those patterns and hurting ourselves more, and developing the strength to be able to turn away, or to be able to switch to vipassana or heart practice and actually start digesting the pattern. And the heart practices help us digest it too, because, you know, when we were young and these things happen that cause the pattern to be there wasn't an adult around us who could comfort us. If there was, then we wouldn't have needed to develop the pattern. So this is where, you know, we're kind of doing for ourselves what we didn't get when we were young and these patterns developed. And then the last category is the self-transcending practices. So this is where, if we have access to non-duality, to, you know, practice that helps us know what we are beyond the body and the personality, beyond the physical realm, knowing what we are is that boundlessness that goes beyond this life and this situation and this body. It makes those problems so much smaller with that huge backdrop of the ground of being. When we can know the ground of being, whatever's happening right now is put in a context that makes it seem not quite, well, could even be dramatically less overwhelming or impactful or important when we actually know what we are, that's so much vaster and more magnificent than that. So this is how each of the categories of practice, they help us in different ways to work with the patterns, and each of them brings something really important and useful. And when we use all four of them together, it becomes even more powerful, because used together, there really isn't anything we can't be with. And this is the potential that the First Noble Truth is never going to go away, that, you know, unpleasant things are always going to happen, even if to a fully enlightened person. You know, there's, I think, this tendency to think, oh, you know, once I'm enlightened, nothing bad will ever happen. Well, that wasn't the case for the Buddha. So, you know, I think maybe we don't want to assume that. But what happens is that we can handle more and more, that there's a sense of capacity, that whatever life throws at us, it may be something new we've never dealt with, but there is a capacity to handle it and to know what we are beyond that circumstance. And that, to me, enlightenment is that ultimately it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, that I can know what I am beyond that no matter what. So that's really the potential for us, is that we find that there's more and more of life that we can stay in the present moment in the face of. And we don't need to resort to the personality patterning as a comfort, as our refuge. We can actually just stay right in touch with the present moment, no matter what is arising. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or comments. Oh, June.
Yeah. Hi, Tina.
Hi, June.
I just wanted to mention one of I mean, you said many things, but the one thing that kind of registered in a different way for me was, so I was looking at one of the repetitive patterns I have that take me away is what I call planning. I'm planning, kind of obsessively. And for a long time, I really kind of, I mean, the piece of that I've understood is that, as a kid, as you're talking about childhood experience, I grew up with a mom, it was just she and I, who didn't plan because she was quite depressed. So she never did any of that. I'm the one who planned Christmas and did all that. But it felt like that was kind of I'd worn out that explanation. It's like I understood that. But one of the things when you talked today about how did that protect you, and it was like a shift in the view of it. And I think what I came to understand was that it protected me from feeling her despair. I mean, if I kept planning things, then I wouldn't have to just be with what was her mood or kind of how she was feeling, or it kept me safer to just make things happen.
Right, right.
So that was a way of, I mean, I guess what I'm not certain about is, I mean, I can see it see this additional way of understanding it, how that will impact, the planning, which I do off the cushion too, way
Well,
over.
we need to be able to plan,
Yeah, but I over plan. I'm
Right.
always kind of, yeah, I think that's a true statement that I overplan. So I guess I'll just have to see how that affects the repetition of the pattern, because it's
Right. Yeah. So you're seeing, how is it right now for you to see that there's this additional part of it that you hadn't, fully taken
well,
in before?
it feels, revealing. It's helpful. It's a helpful way of understanding it. I mean, I don't think I've ever really been down on myself. It's like, because again, I thought, oh, well, of course you had to do this, so I was not really judging myself for it, although I can get into judging myself for continuing to do it over and over to some degree, but
Yeah, well, that's great. And I guess one of the things as you're talking that I'm curious about, it sounds like what you're seeing there is that, I mean, it was effective. You needed to plan because she wasn't. So, I mean, just from a practical standpoint, you needed to, but there's also a way it buffered you from being in touch with her difficult emotional state.
absolutely.
And so it was a defense like, I don't want to be in touch with this difficult emotion. So if I plan, I don't have to be in touch with it.
Exactly.
So is there a part of that that relates to now?
Keeping me now from difficult emotional states.
Yeah, that if something's there that you'd rather not be in touch with, the planning is a way. I mean, it sounds like it's a habit. It could be a conditioned habit more than undigested material, but it could be a habit that is just like, if there's something that you'd rather not be with, it's kind of more fun to do planning.
Yeah, I'd have to kind of reflect on that. Nothing comes
Yeah,
to mind right away, but
right.
I mean, do I use that currently defensively to kind of
Right.
not?
And the best way to know, I mean, this goes not just for you, but for everybody, is when it's happening. And like if we had more time, we could do an inquiry right now around it. But you can do it when you're on the cushion, you notice the planning's happening, to just feel yourself planning. What does it feel like to do planning? Okay, I'm just going to let myself do planning. Okay, what does it feel like? Like I'm going to just make up something. I'm not saying this is you. Okay, well, I'm looking to the future. That's kind of, there's a little bit of excitement in looking to the future. I feel like I'm on top of things. So there's capacity, you know. Um, okay, so like, why am I planning right now while I'm meditating? Okay, I'm just going to sit here and feel that.
Mm.
Well, is there anything? Well, actually, I'm kind of bored sitting here meditating.
Mm.
And it's a lot more interesting to do the planning than just sit here with nothing going on. I'm not saying this is you, but
Yeah.
I'm just making up, a reason. And then who knows what's under that. So this is where for you just to be in real time, to be curious, you're turning right to the experience of the planning and seeing what is it actually doing. Just
Right now.
the place of discovery isn't what you already know, because you already know a lot about this and why it's there. The place of but it's still running anyway. So there's
Exactly.
something that you haven't discovered. So the place of fruitfulness is what you don't know. So that's where to really go in with complete don't know mind and try to be with it as experientially as possible, not with like trying to figure out what it's doing, but just like feeling it, feeling
Maybe
what it's
feeling in the body too, using the
feeling it
body.
in the body, in the heart, feeling how does it feel? Do I enjoy it? Do I not enjoy it? Does it feel like drudgery, but it's so compulsive? I just do it, those would be, either of those could be possible, and that would be real different. So that would be the encouragement, is to see what is going on. Also, is it, which of the three defilements does it feel like? Does it feel like delusion, where like sometimes people will tell me, I'll come in on a 2-week retreat and somebody's just had like a non-dual experience and they're in there planning their grocery list in the next sitting instead of being with their deeper nature. Why would they do that? Well, it's, they're avoiding something, so this is where we don't know what it is for you. So to just, be curious, and which defilement is it? So that, like planning a grocery list, to me is delusion, because there's no reason to do that while you're on a 2-week retreat. Or even, I mean, if you are going to the grocery store that day when you're at home, maybe there's a little bit of a reason to do it. But so is it delusion? Is it aversion? Like you're planning because you don't want a bad thing to happen. And if you plan perfectly, then nothing bad will happen. That's more like you got a tone of aversion. Or is it desire? You're planning because it's fun to plan. You're looking forward to Christmas and celebrating with your family. And, that alone, with planning, almost everybody has a planning pattern, but like which defilement it is can also give you some insight into what's going on with the planning.
Yeah. No, I like the question, do you enjoy it? I don't think I've ever quite considered that. Or am I planning to make sure to keep away? Oh, that's what it felt like just in that moment. Keep something bad away. If I plan, then, I'm kind of in control and nothing.
Right.
Much less likely something unexpected or negative can happen. Yeah.
Right. So it's more an aversive planning. Good. So it's even just right now, you've discovered that it's a little bit more to keep, which, as what you talked about with your history, totally makes sense. If you had a parent who wasn't doing that, you were trying to manage the chaos, and have a reasonably, effective life. So Yeah, but this is a great place for you to explore and just see what you can, we're opening it up and digesting more of what is really going on under there, because this has been there a long time.
For sure.
Yeah. Thanks, June.
Yeah.
Okay, Joe Beth.
The first thing I want to comment on, June, is that as you were talking about it, all of a sudden I got the feeling that a little child should not have to take responsibility for this, and there might just be a lot of there might be some anger in there, and as well as I just wondering if that might be true. So, and I wanted to also say that I'm really glad to have this information of how to use the different types of practice, different types of meditating to heal things. As I was thinking about that, it seems like samatha and vipassana was the first thing I learned, and then they learn them both kind of simultaneously, but I didn't have any real awareness of how they were helpful to each other. And this evening I was thinking about something that happened in my childhood that could continue the rest of my life. That I had a father that was alcoholic and abusive to both me and my mother, and I, at some point when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I wasn't so aware of hating him as being afraid of him, and also afraid of him because of the harm he was doing mostly to my mother. And I just, at one moment in time, I just felt like I killed him. And I've been saying that ever since. And it was just, I'm looking at it now as an adult, as just my heart contracted around that whole experience of being. And I know that I was protecting myself when it was really necessary to, but that's affected my whole life. And I was wondering, what came up for me tonight was that killing him, hating him, whatever, I called it killing him. Right. And when he died, there was no grief. I was happy. I was so relieved and happy, both for myself and my mother. And I have no guilt about that. But now I'm realizing that perhaps what I was doing and what I've been doing all along is not getting in touch with my childhood grief around not having a father that was doing a father's job that I was. So I'm just idea. It's a new idea for me, and I think it feels like I've hit onto something that's a possibility for myself. So,
yeah, that's exactly it, Joe Beth. There's a way, and I'm so sorry that was part of your childhood. It sounds really, really painful. But as a kid, this is a way we can take back some powers. You killed him inside you. And it's a way that we can hold that. The other person never even has to know we have it, but it's a way that we're annihilating them inside. And again, it's protective because he was harming you and you wanted to have him be gone. So now the opportunity, and he is gone now, he can't do anymore. And you're not sad about that. Practically, it's a good thing for you and your mother. So there's that, but then there's the part that was that little girl that was harmed by it. And, you know, so now the opportunity is really to come back and reclaim all of that. So that's the place, I think, to let yourself really feel, you know, whatever is there right at this point. Like if you find that that's coming up and sitting, let yourself have the hatred or whatever's there now, and just be curious of what it's doing or what it did. And that's the exploration to where we can potentially reclaim those parts that did what they had to. And we all did this. We did what we had to do, but now the opportunity is to reclaim it.
It feels kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, well, we do it just a little bit at a time. And you don't have to do any of it. You know, you can, but this is where then the heart practice comes in of, you know,
what was the
giving, like if you find that you're getting in touch with some of this, then you might want to bring in some compassion for yourself.
Yes.
You know, so this is where the heart practices can be a balm as we start getting closer to these places that were really just too overwhelming. We then bring in the other categories, or you may need to just turn away from it and use the samatha to just say, you know what, I'm just coming back to the breath, to something that's going to be soothing, where I'm not digesting anything. I'm soothing myself.
Yeah, I've done some of the heart practices with just knowing that there was suffering, but I hadn't been able to pinpoint it as clearly as I did tonight. So
right, that's great. So there's a little entry point into there. Yeah,
gives me a lot of hope. Thank you.
Good, you're welcome. And I know we're going over, so if anyone needs to drop off, feel free to do that. But I'd like to have a little bit of time for Marion and Lynn, and then we'll wrap up. Marion?
There we are. Thanks. You haven't directly addressed this tonight, and I'm not sure what you think about it, but I've just been reviewing all of my personal ways of going through what is this pattern about. Oh, I see what's under that. Oh, I see what's under there. I see what's under there. So, I mean, I've used anxiety as fuel in my early adulthood, and then I figured out it was a really expensive fuel, but I used it to get everything done. And, you know, I went deeper and figured more things out about that. And way back, I think it's really useful to go back to your earliest awareness of feeling various kinds of these patterns. But what I have found to be really, really useful, not necessarily on the cushion, but is to actually let the feeling be in the body. Like cry, yell, laugh hard, sweat, shake, all of that stuff. Like you just can't mentally discharge all of this, is my personal awareness. And that if you can find somebody to witness you, you know, it makes a big difference to be able to just shake it out of your body. And
absolutely,
in terms of this thing of when I was I have a similar history to many people that, you know, my father molested me, other people did. I was really young. And part of the patterns that developed on top of that had to do with getting everything right, being a really good student, doing everything right, getting approval, you know, and that was my way. Like if I could control everything. And the big thing was, if I figure out the right thing to do, then they won't do this to me anymore. Which, you know, that was my survival, to believe that I could control it. But when I got to the place in my, you know, adult explorations of all this, what I realized was I had no control at all. And that was just terrifying. And there was no way as a little one I could open up to that amount of terror.
Right.
But then when I was older and I had sessions with people where I would just shake for 20 minutes, just shake. And that was really potent, because coming out of that, like a whole lot of that stuff just dropped off. So I just wanted to say that's another possible way this can happen.
Absolutely, right. The body, you want to include the body and the heart. You know, this is all the centers. The belly center is really, you're bringing the body, because the body holds all of this,
Yeah.
you know. And so the shaking, like animals, when animals have an experience of, you know, the hawk coming and they play dead, they get up, they shake,
Yep.
and it's gone. But we don't
It's
do that.
gone.
We control it, and so it gets stuck in the body. So it's
Mhm.
wonderful that you've done that, and feeling the heart too. And really, we can't do it with the head. We can
No.
know what the logical reason why this
Yeah.
is here. That's a beginning, but we really have to usually it's in the heart and it's in the
Mhm.
body. So I love that you're doing that and bringing that in. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Marianne.
I think it's a thing that we are born knowing how to do. Last bit of this is like, if you watch babies, like if you're with a baby, a really young baby, and something happens, that they get startled or they got a wet diaper or they're hungry. I mean, they're gonna like yell at, they're gonna shake sometimes and sweat and then because we were never allowed to do that when we were little, or got smashed pretty quick. We're watching a baby do all that, and if they keep going for a while, it's a little nerve-wracking. But then once they get it all out, they're like, ooh, ooh, ah. And we're all like, oh, God, how am I going to calm down enough to be with this baby now? They're fine. But I think that's our original capacity to do just the thing that I'm talking about.
Right.
And we just get
Yeah.
socialized out of it. So
And pretend.
anyway, that's it.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Thanks, Marianne. Lynn?
Hi. Well, after everybody's story, I just want to express my gratitude for you convening this Sangha. It's lovely. But I especially was when June was talking about the planning thing, because it's a huge thing for me too. And and mine, I think, is partly because I really enjoy planning. And something about hearing other people talk about them doing it too, I realize for me, it's a lot of control in it. And, something that you enjoy doing and gives you control, it's really hard for me not to be distracted by it. So one of the questions I had was, I've heard you a lot of using the word digest the material. And I'm kind of curious about that word. What, maybe what does it really mean? Because I think, well, awareness is one thing, but digesting is something different. And I'll just say, I'm really interested in thinking about how planning relates to my relationship with my mom, which I had never even thought about before. But I'd like to ask you about this digesting and how
the digesting. Yeah, well, if you kind of think of it like compost, these patterns we're there for reasons, and we don't need to hate them. If anything, we can, at some point, like I remember when one of my patterns, I could really feel it was kind of going away. I just like bawled my eyes out because I realized how grateful I was for it and how much I needed it. And it wasn't the enemy, it was the savior in a way. It just wasn't needed anymore because it blocks our deeper nature. That's the thing, is that they block us from knowing what's beyond that. So the digesting, it's like compost, I have a compost bin out there, and it looks like it goes in there as a solid recognizable object, and within several months it's turning into a mush, but I can still see like the avocado peel that doesn't break down that quickly. I can see that. But then if it's in there a few more months, it gets integrated, and then I put it in the garden, and at some point it's just part of the rest of the dirt. I can't tell where that was. It just gets reintegrated. So by digesting, these are structures in our consciousness that make up the ego self. And, as we see it more and more, we can see that it's an empty mental construct, but they are needed for us to feel safe in the physical realm where we have to keep these body things alive. you know, in order to have an experience in the physical realm. And we do need to protect them. So, I mean, that's part of what the survival instinct is there for. But the problem is that the ego self gets laminated to the survival instinct. And then when our ego structures get threatened, we feel like our survival's at stake. And because we're identified with them. So this is where, as they thin out more and get digested, it really is just like compost. They can become thinner and thinner to where they aren't really doing a whole lot. And then they can get reabsorbed back into our ground nature to where there's nothing, like if you looked for that, there wouldn't be anything to see in your consciousness. Just like when I look into the soil, at some point, I can't tell where the avocado rind is because it's gotten completely digested and reabsorbed. So it's like that. It's a structure. The ego is a structure that can get completely reabsorbed into consciousness.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Lots to
yeah.
contemplate.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that you've seen that happen to some extent around some other patterns.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have. This is part of why we can see practice actually works, because it's happened in other areas of our lives. You know, it just hasn't happened as much in that particular area. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and stop there. Thanks for the questions and your participation. And one question I had for you all, we as a teaching team, you know, this year is a kind of an experiment with doing this monthly Sangha. And we wondered if there might be people who, once we finished, like with this part, which would normally end at 6:30, that some people might want to go into triad breakouts and, you know, have a question that you would just talk about with others, you know, privately in a smaller group where you wouldn't have to be like in front of everybody and stuff. And it would be optional. So anybody who didn't want to do it could drop off. But we thought about maybe starting to offer that if people were interested. And if not, then we won't. But just show of hands, how many people, you're not obligating yourselves, but how many people would be interested in something like that? Okay, so maybe next time we'll try it. And, you know, it would be like 10 minutes, not a long time. But it would just give you a chance to interact with each other and have more of a Sangha experience like you would if we were in person, where you can actually, you know, some of you have been on retreats together and stuff. Maybe you didn't talk, maybe you did. But, you know, it's more of a simulation of what we would be doing if we were in person. So, so next time we will give that a try and see how it goes. Good. Okay. Well, wonderful to be with you all, and may we all be fully composted at some point.